Hey everyone's Failed Shot back at another video, and in this one I'm going to be going in depth into Queen 12. I'm going to be showing all the mechanics and doing a little bit of a brief explanation of them all, and then more importantly I'm going to be showing you some early game teams for the first thing you should be going for, mid game teams, and late game teams. So how to progress and get your queen run from 12 minutes to about 2 minutes, because it's really important for those of you that have the characters available to you to make the best team possible. I'm also going to show the stats of each one of my characters throughout the video. I'm also going to leave timestamps in the description down below, showcasing each team as we go. There's probably like 8 or 9 team comps, I think. I'm also going to show all the replacements and such that you'd need to make a similar team in regards to the team I showcase at the moment. All right. If you are enjoying these videos, be sure to leave a like, drop a comment down below, subscribe to the channel, and let's jump into the mechanics of Queen 12. So first things first, I'm not going to showcase anything really under stage 12. If you're on stage 11 or before, just use the first team that I'm going to showcase, the earliest progression team. It'll work for any stage below 12, as well as working for 12. So what are we going to need to tackle the queen boss? Well, you can see here are some couple of the late game and some of the teams that they're using for stage 12. But why are they using these teams? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at first the waves before the boss, and that is these little crabs. So these little crabs actually do quite a bit of damage, and one of the reasons why you wipe earlier on is these crabs on the first wave. These crabs do a ton of damage, and they have a chance to launch a second attack. So if several crabs go ahead and hit one single character, and then they launch bonus attacks, you could be taking your entire character's health bar within that first wave, which is why you may have a 95% win rate, but not 100%, because if they all target the same character, that character is going to die, which is where the main reason why people fail in the early game teams, because these crabs do a ton of damage. And then we have the left boss here, or the left crab here on the boss, and that is this Tide Guard. It's just going to do a bunch of damage. It's going to apply joint attack, which is going to call all the other allies on the boss fight to attack you, and it actually ends up doing quite a bit of damage. And then we have the right Tide Guard here. This one also just does an AoE and just single target damage, but more importantly, it has a skill here, heals the boss for 30% of max HP. So oftentimes we need to target the right guard first, and the reason for that is if we do not, our poisons, which is what the teams we're going to be running pretty much throughout the entire video, is going to not do enough damage. And even if you have 10 poisons on the boss, this is literally healing for that exact amount, unless you have Gangelo and such. So in reality, you have to deal with this right ad unless you have Gangelo later on to out heal or out damage the heals here, or if you can apply unhealable is another way. And then we have the boss itself, and she has a couple abilities. First off is the Blessing of the Empress. This is a buff that she can place every 2 rounds on herself, and it could be, basically get one of 3 random buffs. It's like resistance up, crit resistance up, and she can apply a bunch of other buffs to herself every 2 rounds. And if she's buffed by at least 3 positive effects, she's going to launch a bonus attack using Dragon Bomb, which is basically just a damaging ability that hits quite hard. And then we have Torrent, and this damages an enemy, applies 1 stack of her passive, which is the Blessing of the Empress, to herself. And that buff could be, again, the crit resistance, the resistance buff, all those things could be applied to her. And then we have one of the most important mechanics to Queen of Tides, and that is the Stifling Aqua Cage. This summons an Aqua Cage. It hits the person who has the highest attack. So this is a really, really crucial moment for a lot of you early game players. You need to get whatever character wants to take this debuff here, the highest attack. 100% of the time for the early game comps, that's going to be Hakron. Hakron is going to be in almost every one of your teams, even in the late game. You can use him in the late game team comps. You're going to want him to tank this Aqua Cage, because by the time you get to the boss, you're going to basically stack up all that max HP, and then Hakron's use kind of dwindles because he's there to increase the tankiness of your team through max HP up and defense up, and he can do both those things while being stunned and taking a little bit of damage from this ability, which is why you want him to be the highest attack. And then we have Water Whip here. Deals damage to all enemies, grants this character a water shield that scales with max HP. Just a shield, which is why no positive effects or removing positive effects is super, super solid. And then we have Tsunami. Summons a Tsunami to damage all enemies. Damage increases by 50% based on the number of casts. So the longer you're in the battle, the harder it is to survive. And this does become quite a bit of damage if you aren't able to beat the boss really, really quickly. So that's basically the overall abilities of the boss. I want to just really quickly mention some of the spells that you're going to want to be running. And mainly that's going to come down to these 2 spells right here, Gaia's Renewal and Water Prison. The extra heal basically just keeps you in the fight a little bit longer. And then Water Prison, because again, That first wave, you're going to want to stun a crab just to manage the damage that you're applying to all your allies. And also, when you get to that boss, the water prison can remove the positive effects, which she ends up having quite a bit of. So that's the characters, or that's the spells we're going to be using. Now, I'm going to start showcasing some of the comps and some of the units that you can replace those comps with, and the stats of those characters. And we're going to start with the free-to-play / early game team, and then we're going to move all the way to the late game / more spending or higher gear requirement teams. And I'm going to showcase all the stats. So let's get into it. So here's the first team, and this is actually on my free-to-play account. And I have the basic team here. We have a Hakron who's at level 60. We have Rog, Valuk, and Radira. And this is pretty much the team that I suggest for everyone who's running their first Queen comp. There's one replacement that I would suggest that is oftentimes very, very easy to make in this comp and will provide you with way better outcome later on in the game, is actually Santis in replace of Rog. And the reason for that is Santis can apply the extra poison off of Valuk's passive and off of Valuk's autos, and so she can apply additional poisons and will actually do more damage than Rog for the boss. However, Rog actually gets through the waves much quicker. Now, you can see here we have 3 5-stars and then Hakron at 60, and that is because Hakron shares his defense with the team once again, so you get the most value out of 6-starring Hakron for your whole team. The next one would be Radira for 6-star because she's going to increase her healing, and then after that you can do Valuk or Rog, whoever's dying quicker, but Rog gets a little bit extra out of his 6-star than Valuk because he does max HP damage and heals for his max HP on his skills. Now, what are some replacements we can run? Well, I already mentioned Santis in replace of Rog. You can also run Desmond, which I'll be showing later, in replace of these poisoners. Any poisoner, like Gangello, Santis, Valuk, all of those can be used in replacement of Rog, or even Valuk. You could use Santis plus Gangello, those types of comps. You really absolutely need Hakron here. Absolutely. There's no chance that you're going to get an early game Queen comp without Hakron. You're going to need a lot more stats than that. Hakron just makes the whole team more survivable. One other replacement that you could make, though, is the healer slot. This could be quite a few characters, actually. It can't really be Abbott. Abbott just doesn't heal quite enough for this stage. You could use him if you had much better stats, but if you're running this type of, like basically minimum requirements, you're going to want a solid healer. So that's like going to be Mathasia or Blackhorn. You can use either one of those in replace of Radira. And if you do happen to have those characters, you're going to absolutely want to run them over Radira because they're going to do much better for you in this dungeon and later dungeons. Now, one last thing is I'm going to put up the stats up on screen here. So you can see that for Hakron, we have about 13k HP, and then we have about 2600 defense. This changes a little bit, but you can also see that there's 0 ascensions on Hakron. So if you get this second ascension, that's going to be massive. We have Valuk, Rog, and Radira, all at very similar kind of HP / defense. Rog has a little bit more defense at like 1440. And he's got about 14k HP. You can see Valuk has about 14k HP and about 1.1 to 1.2k defense, depending on what you're running and depending on what your ascensions are. And then, of course, we have Radira. You can have her at about 14k HP and about 1k to 1.2k defense. Obviously, this all depends on what ascensions you have. You can get more stats there. It also depends on how much defense your Hakron has. It also depends on, of course, whether or not you have the second ascension from Radira and the second ascension from Valuk and the second ascension from Rog, because Radira actually gets extra max HP from her passive trait and Rog gets extra damage, and then Valuk also applies that dodge or accuracy down rather from his trait as well, which increases the survivability of this team as well. So this ends up being a 8 to 10 minute run, depending on how lucky / unlucky you are, with Valuk landing the poisons. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and skip ahead until that point, till the end of this run, because it ends up being quite a long run, and we have a bunch of comps to go through. So I'm going to go ahead and skip to show you the end of this battle. So we're nearing the end of the battle, and it's been about 8 minutes in this specific recording of the battle, and we are just barely inching there. It is super important to note that these characters will end up dying if you don't have the proper stats on that first wave with the crabs. The boss stage is actually much easier to survive. Once you get to the boss stage, it's going to be much easier. You can see there, though, that Hakron is tanking the basically the Stifling Aqua Cage from the Queen. That's super important to get Hackron's attack up. We're going to see the time on this run, and then we're going to move to the next one, which is going to be a minor improvement on this team in regards to speed. So you can see here we have a 10-minute run. It is quite long. Absolutely. It's going to be a long run if you're running Queen initially. We're going to go ahead and jump into the second run and just show you some minor differences here and a little bit faster. So here's the second version of this comp. And again, you can see there's many different units here. We have completely different except for Hackron. Hackron stays the exact same. And this is the team that I ran on my main account as one of my earliest Queen 12 comps. This ends up being, I think, about a 6 to 8 minute run, maybe a little bit longer depending on how Desmond's plague works out. Desmond's an excellent character for Queen 12. This is a very slow team, but again, we have to target the right ad and then the boss, because we don't have enough damage to go straight for the boss, and that's going to be consistent until we start reaching some of those later game teams. And in this case, Desmond doesn't really need crit rate. You're going to see he's critting a lot. I'm going to show the stats in a little bit later, but you don't need crit rate on him. He does a little bit more damage and it speeds up the run a little bit. And of course, these stats are much higher, which I will show up on screen now. We have about 17k HP on Desmond with 1.2k defense. We have about 21k HP on Mythasia with about 1.6k defense. We have 16k on Santis and then 1.4k defense. And you have about 17k HP on Hackron and then 2.9k defense. Now, I do have a 1 Ascended Mythasia and a 2 Ascended Hackron. I was able to run this team before that. These stats are higher than they probably need to be. Just to keep that in mind. But this is going to be your next step up. You're going to try to replace your Valukes, your Rogs, with some more damage dealing characters. Maybe that's a Desmond, maybe that's a Santis. Santis is going to be a little bit harder to gear. Now, you can run that initial comp with Santis in place of Rog, and again, it's going to be faster, but it's going to be a little bit harder to gear. However, it's not doable for your first initial Queen comp. It depends really on how your gear rolls and such. All that matters a lot. Now, one thing to mention about the previous comp and this comp is your poisoners actually need about 50 to 60% focus. I recommend 50% at the minimum. You can run 40%, but you're going to get resisted a decent amount. 50%, you're almost never going to get resisted. And 60% is for when you have the stats to be able to land your poisons every single time, especially for characters like Desmond, Santis, Valuk. Those poisoners are going to need focus as much as they can get. So we're going to let this play out. We're going to jump to the end and just see the time. And then we're going to jump into some really fast comps, or not really fast, but faster, a big leap, because these are sort of the base comps. You're going to be running a healer, Hackron plus 2 poisoners, and then go for the right side ad. But we're going to see some Zatlux comps in just a moment, starting to enter the mid game of Queen runs, and then we're going to transition into late game. So I'm going to skip ahead, and then we're going to see the time on this run. So here we are, we're at the boss, and we have about 45 seconds left in the run. And I just wanted to showcase why Desmond is an excellent character for Queen and one of the best poisoners out there. You can actually run Desmond as a solo damage dealer. He does that much damage. But you can see, just watch the Queen's HP as she takes a turn. 76k HP. That's almost equivalent to like a Gangello type level if you had a bunch of poisons on them. And that's another replacement I wanted to mention in this team, is you could be running Gangello in place of Desmond. Any poisoner, again, is going to be great. Gangello is going to be slightly better than Desmond, or at least more consistent. Rather, Desmond has the potential to do a lot more and a lot faster, but Gangello certainly is more consistent. And again, you're going to want quite a bit of healing in order if you're using Desmond, because he does take a lot of damage. So revival sets are really nice on him, which is why I say this is probably the next step up. Once you farm a little bit of Queen, you get some revival pieces. You can start equipping this, and you can lose some of your HP because you have the extra innate healing in regards to your gear. And you can see here, this is a 5-minute, 46-second run, which is actually one of the faster runs. To be honest, it's probably around more often to be 5:30 to about 7 to 8 minutes. It really just depends on how Desmond lines up his plague. But you can see this is a drastic improvement over the 10-minute run, almost 30-40% off. I mean, in this run, it was about 48% off of the time previously. But we're going to jump into some Zatlux and some of the mid-game comps that I would suggest for you players out there looking to speed up your Queen runs. So here we are. We're going to enter some mid-game teams here, and this is going to be a little faster than what you're going to be expecting. And the reason for that is we're using Shen Evil's account. Thank you, Shen, for allowing me to use your account to showcase some of these comps. He has an Ascension 5 Santis and an Ascension 2 Gangello, which is going to speed up the run quite a bit, maybe about a minute to a minute 30, depending on how lucky you get, obviously with the Santis passive. So just keep that in mind. Now, again, you can see here we're using double Poisoner, Healer, and Zatlux. You could also use Hakron in place of Blackhorn, and you can use any 2 Poisoners in place of Santis and Gangelo, but realistically, you're probably going to end up using Valuk and Santis here because most of you have those types of characters. Now, I'm going to drop the stats up on screen here, but these are the stats of these characters. You do not need this much stats in order to complete this run. We have 22.5k HP on Santis, roughly 1.4k defense on Santis as well, 25k HP on Gangelo with 1.6k defense. And then we have 23k HP on Blackhorn, 1.8k defense, and then Zatlux has 4.2k attack with 250% crit damage. So you can see here that these stats are quite high. You don't need these high of stats in order to beat the run, but it is very, very helpful to get as high stats as possible. And of course, these are the types of stats that you're going to want to be running for speed running, not necessarily for this, which is mid-game progression. One important thing to note is if you're going to be using Hakron in this team instead of Blackhorn, a great way to actually make this really, really secure is having Hakron go first, because by the time you get to the boss, he's going to be able to apply 2 stacks of his max HP, which will make the run much, much more consistent. As well as if you want to make this run faster, even faster, get Zatlux to go before your Gangelo, your Poisoners, and everyone, but he's going to need more damage because a lot of the times people have Ascension 2 Zatlux. So if you kill the first crab after they've kind of softened it up with some basics, you're going to get the attack buff, and then the other crabs are going to be no problem. However, if he's going to go ahead and hit the crab right away, you're going to need enough damage to actually kill the crab on your own with Zatlux, which could be a little difficult. So you can see here, the run is already done. And the previous run was about 5 minutes, 60 seconds. This one ends up being 2:13. However, this is, again, a very, very drastic kind of time shift because we have Santis and Gangelo's abilities on. And when Santis basically uses her second skill and it duplicates poison, if that pops over to the boss, you're going to have a much faster run. And if it doesn't, you're going to have a much slower run. So I'd say that this team average is about 3 to 3:30. This is definitely one of the faster runs, absolutely. And of course, if you don't have the Ascension 2 Gangelo and Ascension 5 Santis, it's going to be much, much slower to about the 3-minute to 4-minute range, which is still a pretty large improvement over the previous one. So now we've gone from a 10-minute run early game to an 8-minute to a 6 to 8 minute comp secondary, and then on this comp we're getting down to 4 to 5 minutes. So we've already shaved more than half of our time off these runs, and we're going to try to shave it down to actually 2 minutes consistently with the next couple runs in the end game. So here we are, and this is the first speed comp that I'm going to be running. This is Endgame, pretty much some of the fastest comps in the game. And we're going to see this one. This one's one of the more classic ones, pretty much the one that everyone went to. Okay, we have a Poison Explosion team with Gajar, Gangelo, Santis. In order to use this team, you oftentimes need an Ascension to Gangelo. And the main thing about this team is that because Gajar has a chance to apply Unhealable when you get those poisons up, you can actually negate the healing on the right side ad. Even if he doesn't apply Unhealable, Gangelo with Ascension 2 has enough damage to just burst through the boss's healing and the shielding, which is why this team comp is so efficient. This is when you start to go straight for the boss rather than targeting the side ad, because you have enough damage to burst through it rather than just take down the ad slowly and then work on the boss. I'm gonna put up the stats on screen here. You're gonna see it's the same stats I just went over. We have a new addition though, and that's Gajar. He's at 15k HP and 1.6k defense. You also want high focus on Gajar to make sure he's landing the unhealables if he has a chance. And you can see there, he just landed the unhealable / resistance down from his passive proccing. And you can see here, Gajar is going to use the Poison Explosion, and then you'll see how much damage it actually does. About 70% of the boss's HP, which is really, really solid, and it's going to be a quite fast run. Now, it's really hard to replace any part in this team comp. You really need pretty much all these members, specifically Santis and Gangelo, Gajar as well. Actually, Gajar can be replaced with a couple other team members that we're going to be showcasing in a little bit. But Zatlux can be replaced with someone like Nathalia. If you have enough buffs, like a guard set on her, she can be Zatlux can be replaced with Nathalia. But other than that, you really need poisoners, and you just need a Poison Explosion. In this case, Gajar for this specific team comp. Again, it's really hard to do speed runs without Gangelo. It's really hard to go straight for the boss with pure burst damage. Someone like Vance and Tinua, it's not going to be possible for the majority of players. And this run actually ends up being a little bit on the longer side of things because We got a little bit unlucky with how all the things landed up. But again, we're going to end up fight here with Gajar's explosion, and then that's the end of the fight. And he got a bonus attack, but there you go. Also, between mid-game and end-game, you can start adding curse sets on your characters. They're actually going to end up being much, much quicker because you're already going to be winning without the curse set. So now the curse set just has that 35% chance to give you a faster run, essentially. And that's when you want to start adding your curse sets. Before that, don't worry about curse sets. Just get as much survivability on your characters as possible. And you can see here, this run was actually 2:23, and it was actually slower than the previous run. But on average, that other previous run actually ran much slower, about 3 to 4 minutes, as I was saying. And this runs about 2:20 to 2:40 from what I've experienced. Maybe a little bit quicker, maybe 2:10 to 2:30 on average in each of these battles. So this is one of the versions of the comp. I'm going to show you 2 more of these speed comps in order to complete this dungeon really quickly. So here we have another really, really fun comp, and this one is very, very late game / high spender, and this is using Evelyn first on. So if you have Gangelo and Evelyn first on, this is one of the fastest runs in the entire game. Evelyn obviously gets that extra turn. One other thing to mention about all the comps we've suggested previously: when you're using Santis with another poisoner, you're going to want the other poisoner to go before Santis if possible. But really, you're going to start doing it for these later game speed comps. And the reason for that is you need the extra poison take oftentimes from her passive. So you need Ascension 5 oftentimes. And this, of course, run is really, really quick with that. Now, earlier on in the mid-game / early game, you don't really care about Gangelo or Santis going first because you're just trying to complete it. You're not trying to go for speed realistically. You may try to be improving your runs, and that's one thing you can do to improve your speed. Now, one thing that we could do about these 3 comps that I'm showcasing here is that Shen can build up the Zatlux here to go before the waves and just one-shot the waves before you take a bunch of turns. You would shave maybe 30-40 seconds off your time if you're able to do that, but your Zatlux needs maybe 160-70 speed and also the damage in order to kill off the crabs, which is quite difficult to actually get. One other thing about this comp in particular, Evelyn, I'm going to show the stats up on screen here, is at 16k HP, 1.8k defense. She doesn't need necessarily to be that tanky. One thing she absolutely needs is to be slower than Zatlux. She does not want to use her ultimate before we get to the boss fight. Otherwise, the run is going to not necessarily fail, but be much slower than it is already. So we want Evelyn to go after Zatlux to make sure she's using her ultimate for when she gets to the boss fight here. You can see here, boss ends up being at 15%, jumps up to 45%, and then we're going to wrap it up in just a second. Now, one thing I do want to mention is I'm going to show one other comp, but I don't have the ability to showcase one comp that I really want to highlight, and that is a Hewlin's comp. In place of Evelyn, you can run Hewlin's, and it's going to be harder to gear up than some of these comps, but Hewlin's will prevent the no positive effects and the unhealable on the boss, which will speed up your runs quite drastically, and can run a speed comp with that. But of course, he's an elite. It's harder to build him, and that is that. So 2 minutes 11 seconds, and this is much more consistent. This one's ends up being 2 minutes to 2:10 from what I've seen. I've run it a couple times, and that's really, really quick. Some of the fastest comps I've ever seen. We're gonna go over one other speed comp for you here. So here we are. This is the last comp that I have to show you, and this is one that I kind of stumbled upon myself. I actually just was plugging in William into the later game comps, and I found that the counterattack really comes into handy when you just want to speed through. You don't need to survive. So here we have William. I'm going to show the stats up on screen here. We have 13k HP, 1.6k defense on William. 1.7k defense on William. It doesn't really matter, to be honest. All he's there for is the extra counterattack so that Gangelo and Santis can apply an additional poison on the boss. So that's the only reason he's there. And so you don't need necessarily for him to be super, super quick. All you want is him to go before the boss. Optimally, you'd want him to go after Zatlux, but before the boss. So again, Zatlux could be sped up much, much quicker in order to one-shot all the waves. And of course, you're going to shave 30 to 40 seconds off your times if you get Zatlux to go first, while also having enough damage. So again, this is a pretty cool comp. It just showcases another unique way that William can be used. You can potentially use the Ice Wolf in this comp. I have not tried that myself. But you can potentially use Ice Wolf. I actually think it might be a little bit faster because he'll die and then he won't take up time using his ultimate and such. Because really, you get this one attack with the counterattack, and then the second time William puts up counterattack, it gets procced by the right ad. Oftentimes, well, hopefully we'll see that here. But you can see that this run is quite cool because you're applying another 2 poisons from Santis and Gangelo from the counterattack, and that's really the only reason William is here. And then potentially you have a chance of getting a joint attack from William on one of the characters. But you'll see here, we're going to go ahead and put up the counterattack. Queen's going to go ahead and put up the Aqua Cage, and then the joint attack's going to come in, and then all the counterattacks goes to the right ad. So that's what slows it down a little bit. However, it is a really, really cool comp, really, really fun one. Ends up killing the boss right there. And you can see here, the speed is not much different from the other 2 speed comps that I've shown. We're going to end up with a 2-minute and 5-second run. Again, it's really, really on par with the Evelyn First Dawn comp. It has a little bit of variety in that one, but really, really quick comp here, and a really, really fun one with William. Again, I think you could shave maybe a couple seconds off if you decide to use Ice Wolf, which is really, really crazy, but definitely a really, really cool comp here. So there you have it. That's kind of how you should be progressing through the stages of the dungeons, because I get a lot of people who ask me, is that looks good? Should I use curse sets? Should I this, that? Well, this is the perfect video for kind of to understand how you should be progressing to the faster times. You're going to want to start off with those slower runs, build up your gear, and then the later runs can be supplemented with those revival sets and the better gear that you're using to speed up your runs. And then gradually you can work your way towards those faster and faster teams. Just like any other gacha game where you're going to start off with your slower teams and then move to your faster teams. It's really interesting to see a lot of these speed comps. They're really fun combos, especially the Gajar and the William one, even the Evelyn one, which I happen to have on main account. Hopefully I'll pull Gangelo soon. But hopefully this helps understand, help you to understand basically how you should be progressing through the dungeons rather than just going straight in with a Zatlux and then not understanding why you're losing, because you definitely need those hack runs, definitely need those slower comps, the poisons, and don't want to be using your Zatlux for your first run. So if you are enjoying this content, be sure to leave a like, drop a comment, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you for the next one. We're going to be doing this for Ash and Tulpa soon, so be sure to stay tuned for that. See you later.